Chad, my friend, thank you so much for joining us again today.
Absolutely, man. Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Man, I'm always so grateful every time we get the opportunity to connect because I always glean so much from your wealth of wisdom and knowledge and experience. But when I look at you, I don't just see you as a friend. I view you as a modern-day warrior, truly a hero, somebody who understands, like I said, sacrifice and discipline. You're somebody who's not only battled on the front lines in the octagon, fought through personal challenges and difficulties, as well as against the principalities, powers, and darkness spiritually that Ephesians 6:12 talks about. You are truly a fighter. And as we head into a new year, Chad, I think it's important to have conversations like this around topics like discipline and mental toughness because there are a lot of our audience members who they have goals, they have dreams, they have resolutions. And I want to hear up front from you, what is it like for you? What's your approach as you head into a new year? Do you make goals and resolutions? Do you focus on one word? What's that look like?
Yeah, I actually always have like these ongoing goals and tasks. I'm pretty like goal or task focused person.
Yeah. Yeah.
So January 1st doesn't change that for me. I know a lot of people do, and I think that's really good if you need a mile marker to do that. For me, it's ongoing. I will, January 1st, I probably reestablish a lot of the goals and tasks, not because it's January 1st, but usually because December is the month I slow down. So it gives me time to kind of recalibrate myself. But I think for me, like this year, I specifically feel a need to be more focused on my spiritual foundation, and I'm not saying that because I'm on the show. Like I really like for me, I get really busy because I'm very task oriented.
Yep.
My priorities slip at times, and I get more busy in the work of ministry and serving God than I do in my personal relationship with God, and that tends to be like an ongoing theme in my life that it's kind of like running in the same parallel, like my relationship with God and the work I'm doing for God. And then at some point, because I'm just so task driven, that relationship with God kind of falls off and I'm just doing more of the work. I wouldn't say every year, but there's times that I kind of catch myself and recalibrate. And that's kind of where I'm at right now. So right now, overall, the goals and things I have, and I have a lot of big projects coming up and a lot of things that I want to have on my New Year's resolution list. It's just seeking the face of God and coming back to a place to where I have just a really strong personal heart-to-heart connection with God. Because that, to me, when I have that, that's when I seem to be most successful anyway. And so if that's off, like all my other goals and stuff doesn't matter because if that's off, I'll be off.
Amen to that, my friend. As you mentioned, there's so many of us that have goals. And like you said, whether it's a day-to-day process, we want to carry over the momentum that we created in 2024 and years prior, but also we just want to keep on kind of reinstating those things come January 1st. A lot of the goals out there, I mean, health when it comes to physical and mental health, budgeting, financial wealth, growing in our spiritual and intimate relationship with Christ and our relationships with others here on this earth. All of those things are great goals, great resolutions to have. But Chad, as you mentioned, sometimes it can be very difficult to follow through with the commitments that we make. 90%, research shows, statistics show, 90% of New Year's resolutions go unmet throughout the year. 50% of those actually are given up on by the second Friday in January. Many have actually recognized the second Friday in January. They've recognized it as Quitter's Day. Chad, that hurts my heart, man. So why? I want to ask you this. Obviously, you mentioned busyness, but what are some of the other contributing factors as to why you believe so many of us quit and are so quick to give in?
Well, I think most of us, everyone, it's innate inside of us. God created us this way that we want to have, we have a desire for improvement.
Yeah.
We're not content, people, because we're not content because we know innately that we fall short of what we were created to be. So we're always seeking the self-improvement. We don't know why, right? But that is why. It's because God created us for this greatness that we don't live up to. So we're constantly seeking. And so when we get to these moments in life where we either or hit a moment of conviction or like maybe a salvation or January 1st where we recognize that. And so this overwhelming motivation, desire to be better leads us to make a big and audacious goal. And we don't have one, we make a goal that maybe is too big and too audacious, and we don't have a plan for that goal to actually. And so it becomes something that we committed to in a moment of motivation or inspiration, and then it becomes unattainable because of the way we either overcommitted or didn't have a plan to execute it. And so that's why I think 40% of Americans at least are New Year's resolutioners, and like you said, I think it's in the high 90 percentiles that never complete it, and then 50% by 2 weeks in, or not completing it. That's the reason why. And so I always say, if you are going to set a goal, whether it's January 1st or a new believer, or just a wake up call, a decision you're going to make it tangible. It
Yes.
doesn't mean you can't have a big audacious goal, but the first phase of it shouldn't be something that's so outrageous. Make it tangible, make it bite sized, and then have a plan to get there. And when you have, and so, saying something like "I'm going to be a better man"
Yeah.
is that's
Yeah.
pretty
It's
big.
pretty
It sounds
broad.
simple, right? That's pretty broad. It's pretty big, right? But I'm going to learn how to be more responsible with my time, to put this down, right? I'm going to
Yep.
put this down at 6 o'clock every day, because that's going to let me be a better husband, better father, or I'm going to learn to have control my language in my home. Those are things that are like bite size,
Yes.
and that you can commit to and actually achieve. And it's easier to hold yourself accountable. And then I think when it comes to plan, have a plan, have some steps, have some milestones. By this date, I should be able to have achieved this. And then also accountability is super important. It's very important to me. If I make a plan, if I make a goal, I have to have an accountability partner. Like, hey, Zach, I just made this goal. Like, I'm asking you as a brother, like, even if we don't live next to each other, can you send me a text once a week and ask me how I'm doing with that?
Yep.
And have that accountability, and those things, putting those things in place help you to not be part of that 99% of people that lose those goals. But man, like I said, every year they're like, I'm going to lose 100 pounds, and I'm going to run a marathon every month, and people make some crazy goals, and they
Yeah.
just don't achieve them, because it's real easy to do that in that moment, in that moment. But some steps, bite-sized steps.
Exactly. No, I love what you're saying. Have tangible, realistic goals, come up with a plan or a strategy to get there, but then also surround yourself with the right people for accountability to make sure that they're pushing you in the direction of those goals as well. The one thing, the reality, though, is that setbacks happen, right? Hardship, suffering, challenge, pain. It's inevitable in this life, Chad. One thing that you and I both recognize, though, and what we have a passion around is really just infusing resilience into those we have the opportunity of interacting with. Resilience, as I've done my research, is positive adaptation in the presence of adversity. You have a show called The Resilient Show. You've spent a lot of time with some of the most highly effective leaders in our day and age. And I want to ask you, what have you learned about resilience? What are some of the lessons? And how can we begin to infuse resilience within our own lives?
Yeah, so on the show, my New Year's episode, I interviewed Jocko Willink, and Jocko's like
Yes.
the discipline guy. Like, if you talk about goal setting, Jocko's like the guy for that. And so I even tried to push Jocko a little bit, like, hey, like, you're a retired, lieutenant commander in the Navy. You have a silver star. You have a good retirement. You have successful businesses. Like, waking up at 4:34 every morning. And I say 4:34 because I just seen his watch. Like, every morning, and getting some is probably okay for you, but is it tangible for the guy who's working 3 jobs just to put food on the table? Like,
Mm.
there's a difference there between his lifestyle and other people's. And he's like, and one of the things is you could always do something, right? And that's that bite-sized thing. So really, that interview, we spoke for an hour just on this subject, and he
Yeah.
gave some really insight. Some things I thought, I've been knowing him for a long time. I consider him a friend, and I think some things I thought I might stump him on. He had some
Yeah.
really good answers. But even more so, as I have an episode out this week, and it's not anybody famous. This is 3 commanders of Ukrainian forces, and they've been all
Mhm.
3 of these guys are on the front lines. They've suffered tremendous loss. One of them lost half of his unit was killed. The surviving 2/3 were captured. He was in captivity with the Russians for 5 months. Just some incredibly resilient men,
Mm.
and we talked about the subject of resiliency, and one of the guys gave a really great answer. He said resiliency, people look at it as tough and hard, but he believes the resiliency is flexibility, being able to
Mm.
adapt to circumstances. And God is with the flexible, and people that are able to adapt. And that the Ukrainian people, this first world nation, that were going to pizza parlors and ice cream shops, taking their kids to the movie theater, and
Yeah.
overnight you had the first world country coming in and firing ballistic missiles the size of telephone poles on the side of apartment buildings and killing millions of civilians. So they've had to be flexible in
Yeah.
their resilience and ability to be able to maintain their way of life, stay in this fight as a small nation against a world superpower has been their resilience and their flexibility. And so, yeah, just these last two episodes of interviewing all these two and those three individuals in Njako, there's some really good insights in there on resiliency. The way I break out resiliency in the show, and by the way, not only in the show, but I've spoken to over 500,000 active duty troops on bases,
Oh yeah.
military bases around the world on the subject of resiliency. I really break it down into four pillars, like four foundational pillars: mind, body, spirit, and social. So to
Mm.
be holistically resilient, you have to be mentally tough. You have to have a right attitude, a right state of mind. You have a really good perspective, worldview, and I believe the best worldview comes from biblical worldview.
Mm.
So your mind has to be in a solid place. Your body, you have to be physically healthy. Whether it means that doesn't mean in the gym strong. It means taking care of your body, eating healthy, putting the right nutrients in your body, being hydrated, like being your body. Socially, surrounding yourself with the right people. Not everybody can pick who they work with, but you can certainly
Yeah.
pick who you let speak into and influence your life. And then spiritually, having a strong spiritual foundation. I believe being resilient means being intentional about those four pillars, and
Yeah.
starts off being honest about those pillars in your life, where you're strong and where you're weak. So like is a real inventory of myself, saying, hey, am I where I want to be mentally? Do I have the right attitude? Do I have the right mindset? Am I where I need to be physically? Am I physically healthy? Am I healthy, like inside, like strength wise, and
Yeah.
both nutritionally and physically? Am I healthy? Socially, am I surrounding myself with the right people? If I'm in circles of people that have like mixed influence and mixed worldviews, like who's influencing who? Or I'm allowing them to influence me, or am I influencing them? And then spiritually, where I'm at, where my spiritual foundation through my relationship with Jesus. Like those four things are super important. And if I'm honest about myself and I'm weak in any of those areas, then I have to have an intentional plan to strengthen where I'm weak. When I speak a lot, I'll typically grab like a four-legged chair and pull it up in front of me, and I say,
Mm.
those four pillars are represented in the four legs of this chair. And if
Mm.
you those mind, body, spirit, social, if one of these legs were weak, the chair by itself would stay standing. It wouldn't
Yep.
collapse. It would stay standing. But as soon as you sat in it, as soon as you put weight on it, if one of those legs were weak, it would break and you go crashing down. And I think that's our life, right? We could put up the front that we're strong in all four of these pillars, but as soon as the weight of life and circumstances, trauma, compressing down on it, if one of those legs are weak, that's the one that'll break and we'll go crashing down. So we don't wait until one of those break to fix it. That's what we typically do, but we shouldn't wait till one of those break to fix it. We should be preemptive on the front end of making sure that our pillars are strong. We shouldn't wait for a circumstance to break one of those pillars and our life to go crashing down. We should be
Yes.
aware enough to say, I'm going to do an honest inventory of myself. We know ourselves better than anyone. Where am I weak? Where do I need to be
Yes.
intentional about fixing it? And so when you're setting goals, I mean, that's why I don't like these trendy goals. And by the way, Jocko, in his episode,
Yeah.
he has a great one, right? But I don't like these trendy goals because now you're just doing what everybody else is doing. It may not be
Yeah.
where you need it most. And like I said, for me, there's some other things that goals I'd like to have, but I know for me, my weakest pillar right now in the four pillars of those things is my spiritual pillar. And I'll,
Yeah.
I'll say that honestly here in a Christian show and I run a ministry. That's my weakest
Yeah.
pillar right now. I'm
Yeah.
aware. I'm self-aware of that. I
Yeah.
mean, it's great if my friends tell me, but I know that. And so where do I need to be intentional about? That's there I need to be intentional about. And
Mm.
that's for me right now. That's where I'm focusing that's the weakest thing. If something catastrophic happened in my life right now and it came pressing down, that would be the weakest place for me.
Yeah. No.
It's being aware of that and then not waiting till that circumstance happened. Be on the front end of it.
Exactly. Being proactive, right? Really preparing for those difficult times, right? Expecting the best, preparing for the worst type of mindset. But like you said, I
That's
appreciate your
resiliency,
vulnerability.
right? That's being resilient. Being resilient
That's
means
being
being
resilient.
prepared.
Exactly. Being
Yeah.
prepared. And I appreciate your vulnerability, just even mentioning, right, that is like your weakest pillar right now. But I love this idea about holistic health. I love this idea about preparation, this idea about resiliency. I grew up in a family, a long lineage of warriors, of soldiers. My dad taught me at a very young age that freedom is not free. That's why I have such a deep love, appreciation, and respect for you, for all those who have served and all those who currently are and will serve in the United States Armed Forces. But then in recognizing that I listened to that conversation with you and Jocko, by the way. It was encouraging. It was challenging, my friend. I loved it because there's this idea that Jocko talks a lot about, and you really pushed him on and you kind of dove into, is that he always says discipline equals freedom. And, not only is that important to recognize, because I think it gives us a greater understanding and appreciation for those who have served and who do serve, but also it gives us a better understanding of what that looks like in our own personal lives, because anything worth valuing in this life really does come at a cost. Chad, speak to the importance of recognizing that discipline actually isn't limiting, but it's actually opening up different opportunities for you that are more meaningful and that are more, in a sense, God-centered and truth-filled to be able to experience the freedom in which God created us for in this life.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of people look at discipline as like what you said, it's almost like a chore, like a task, and really it's a weight that's lifted off, right? You're gonna suffer one of two ways. Like you'll suffer from the pain of I mean, you're going to suffer in life. Like this is a broken, fallen world. Like so, in this hard world that we live in, you're gonna suffer one of two types of things. You're gonna suffer the pain and suffering of discipline, or you're gonna suffer the pain and suffering of regret. Like you can't pick. Like you're gonna. So I'd rather pick the one, and I'd rather deal with the pain of discipline than the pain of regret, because regret's something you can't change, you can't get back. But discipline, and that's where we're talking about being on the front end, like being on the front end. That's where resiliency means, being on the front end. Like as a special operator, like as a Force Recon Marine, like we don't go out on an operation and like, what do we do if we get a forward ambush? I don't know. We'll figure it out when it happens. We'll call a combat timeout. We'll figure it out. Of course not. No, we know exactly what we're going to do. We prepared in advance for it. We were intentional about that situation. Said this is a threat. This could happen. So let's train for it. Let's have the discipline to train for it. Prepare for the scenario. And by the way, we rehearse it like 100 times. That way when it happens, we don't have to think about it. And that's how we treat like. That, in my job, that's how we would treat something like that. In everybody's professional life, they have something that they do like that, the discipline of that, a preparation. So that's the pain, the discipline, the suffer of preparing. Like we have to take time, we have to take energy. We don't feel like doing it. It's going to be hard. But when that scenario presents itself, we survive, right? There's no regret. Have we not prepared for that, buddies are going to die, people are going to die, the mission's going to be a failure. There's massive regret there. But if we had the discipline in the front end, and that's the same in our life, man. Like, if we aren't intentional and put discipline into our marriage, our family, our relationship with Christ, we don't put discipline into our work life, like all the things that we do, then the consequence is there's going to be failures in that, and there's going to be regret. So you're going to have the suffering of the discipline, again, the suffering of regret. So for me, when you talk about the word discipline, it sounds to people like, I don't want to live a different life. That's hard.
Right.
Well, it's actually, if in the grand scheme of things, it's not as hard as the opposite. And you're going to get one of those things. You're going to have regret. I mean, man, I've only been out of shape to where I consider myself out of shape like 2 or 3 times in my life. And my out of shape is probably not compared to a lot of people out of shape, because I'm always because I just can't take it. I feel like terrible. But just traveling or deployments, like I'm stuck overseas and I can't work out, I can't eat well, and I come back, I'm like, oh man, I feel so out of shape. I couldn't imagine like what it feels like to wake up one day and be like, it's hard for me to get up and walk to the mailbox. Like that, to me, the regret of that, the pain of that, living in that state of life of being like, how could that be any easier than the discipline it takes to wake up every morning and go for a 1-hour walk, or or choose a water over a can of Coke. I'd much rather the discipline that comes on the front end and to suffer the discipline of a disciplined lifestyle than suffer regret.
That's exactly right. When you choose
suffer one of two things: the pain of discipline or the pain of regret. You
exactly,
you get to choose.
That's right. And when you choose the pain of discipline, you have on the opposite side of the door, how I always say it is like there's a reward and there's regret, right? When you choose discipline, you can experience the pain of reward. But when you neglect discipline, you naturally will more than likely end up experiencing the pain of regret. You're listening to Life, Love, Faith, and Family. I'm your host today, Zach Clinton. We're blessed to be joined by highly decorated former Force Recon Marine, Department of Defense contractor, and founder of the Mighty Oaks Foundation, Chad Robichaux. Chad, as I mentioned, we've talked a lot about discipline. We've talked a lot about resilience, New Year's resolutions, and more. But you're a fighter. You're a warrior, tough as nails, but that doesn't mean that you're a stranger to pain and adversity in this life. I've heard your story many times. And what a lot of our audience might not be aware of, though, is that for soldiers and for veterans, the war often comes home with them. And oftentimes that's the shape of post-traumatic stress disorder. You've been vulnerable in your story and your testimony, sharing it all across the world about the challenges that you've gone through as it relates to PTSD. But you have a bone-chilling story about a very low, deep, dark, difficult moment in your journey that your wife, Kathy, actually not only encouraged you, confronted you, challenged you in, that really began to change your life and change your story. I would love for you to take us back to that moment. What happened there, but then also how have you begun to manage and overcome the symptoms of PTSD in your own life?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was a Force Recon Marine, to be a DoD contractor on a JSOC task force, and I went to Afghanistan 8 times in that capacity, and during those, there's some very hard deployments, and some things happened. There's a lot of loss of friends, and I had dealt with several things, including abduction by a foreign intelligence agency. And a lot of those things led to me coming home, being diagnosed with PTSD and dealing with debilitating panic attacks, anxiety, depression, and went in a real dark spiral. And it led me to hitting a rock bottom. That rock bottom for me ended up being separating from my family, facing a divorce, and having a real battle with taking my life. And I think I know very well that that we're in a suicide epidemic in America, and
Yes.
I think globally, but certainly in America, the highest in our lifetime. And then in the veteran first responder community, it's just catastrophic. I mean, it's some people say 22 a day. The real numbers are probably more like in the 40s or 50 a day. Nonetheless, one a day is too many. And I had reached this point to where I'm like, I didn't want to take my life because I wanted to die or because I wanted to escape pain. I realized the damage I was causing the people that I loved and cared about. And this conclusive thought came over me that maybe my family would be sad without me, but they would be better off. And so I decided to take my life, and a Glock 22 pistol, and I was sitting in my closet in my apartment with the pistol to my head. And I put my family pictures on the floor around me to try to build up the courage to kind of pull that trigger. And it was in that moment my wife had came and knocked on my door in my apartment, and this had went on for a short period of time, and but it was one of those moments that was in that closet, and she had knocked on my door in my apartment, and I wasn't going to answer it, but when I heard her voice, I panicked. I went to the door, and I was just so angry that she was there interrupting me killing myself. It was like, which sounds crazy, but I was just so angry. She was uninvited there. She didn't belong there. She was interrupting me in that moment. And I was just yelling at her for her to leave. I just wanted her to leave, and she wouldn't leave. And in that argument that we had, she asked me a question that radically changed my life. She's like, how could I do everything I did in my life? And she saw me I talked about discipline. She saw that discipline lifestyle. She saw me, we met when we were 17 and 18. She saw me become a recon Marine. She saw me go to schools and training and deployments and the MMA side, cutting weight for fights and all this stuff. She saw this discipline lifestyle. She's like, how could you do all of that? When it comes to your family, you'll quit. And for me, that was so convicting. She was absolutely right. I've been successful at professional things, but when it came to the most important things, like being a husband, being a father, I quit, and I quit on my own will to live. And so I made a pretty radical decision at that point to get back in that fight. It wasn't anything to do with my faith or God. I just knew that the work ethic, the discipline, the things that you hear Jocko talk a lot about, the things that made me successful as a recon Marine, like all those things, I had the knowledge of being able to have that work ethic and discipline and character to do those things. And so I thought if I could apply that to my life, I could pull this thing back together. And again, it had nothing to do with my faith at that moment, but what it did come in is, you talk about those pillars, like mentally and physically, I had those things. I battled my mental health, but I had a pretty strong mind, a pretty strong body. Socially, I had surrounded myself. So I'm going through those pillars, right? Socially, I had surrounded myself with people that told me everything I wanted to hear and not what I needed to hear. I had no accountability in my life. So the one area I recognized, I was looking at 3 pillars, right? Mind, body, spirit, social. I wouldn't look at the faith pillar. The one area I recognized in that moment was that I didn't have that social support. And I knew I couldn't do it alone. And I knew I couldn't do it with the people I surrounded myself by. I needed some hard accountability because I was in that 3-year downward spiral. I was in this MMA gym. I won a world title. I was black belt jiu-jitsu, like everybody lifted me up. And again, I had no accountability. So I wanted to go outside of my circle. So I asked my wife, who was going to this church, is there some man at this church that could hold me accountable that's making this decision? And she introduced me to this man named Steve Toth, who was an elder on call at the church. And so what I was seeking was that social pillar, someone outside my network that would hold me accountable to this decision. What I got was the social and the spiritual, because he's the one that identified that 4th pillar. And he, as I met with him and presented that plan of how I was going to fix my life, I'm like, hey, I need you to help me. This is how I fix my life. Basically, I'm capable, right? I'm mentally tough. I'm physically tough. I've done all these things. Like, I have a plan here, like how I'm going to fix my life. And he said, if this plan doesn't have anything to do with your relationship with God, I'm not going to waste your time. I'm not going to let you waste mine. That was the fourth. That was a spiritual pillar. And in that moment, looking back, not knowing that at the time, knowing what I know now, looking back, that was the one moment that first time in my life that I had all 4 of those at the same time, because I followed his lead and I stepped into a relationship with Jesus. I didn't even really know what I was doing. I just knew that I needed to do something because nothing else in my life was working. We have a saying that we have a foundation that comes from this. If what you're doing isn't working, why not try something different? What I was doing wasn't working. Medication, counseling, VA counseling, therapist, all this stuff I tried. Professional success, financial success, the accolades of winning MMA titles. None of those things were working. It was time for me to try something different. So he presented the spiritual pillar. I stepped into that through a relationship with Jesus and became very intentional about that. And through that discovery, what I realized was maybe simple to some people, but it's pretty profound to me. What I realized was all these bad things that had happened to me in my life. Terrible childhood, very physical abusive childhood, had loss of life early on. My brother died when it was shot and killed when I was 14. He was 15. Going in the Marine Corps and the hardships of, my marriage. We've been married 30 years now, but going into a marriage coming out of 2 broken families, it was very difficult navigating how to be married. And so there's a lot of hardship there. And then going to Afghanistan and losing friends there and all the stuff that happened, as bad as those things were, I recognized those things alone didn't leave me to be in that closet with a pistol man. What led me there were the choices I was making in response to those things. I was making poor choices that was leading me to bad places. And what the Bible had presented to me was a blueprint for living and how to make better choices. So it became a tool to be intentional. People say all the time, life doesn't come with a handbook, but the truth is it does. We just don't read it, right? The Bible becomes a pretty good handbook. And so what I was discovering was that I was still facing anxiety. I was still facing depression. I was still facing anger. Just stepping in a relationship with Jesus didn't miraculously heal those things. I'm not saying God can't. It didn't for me. But what it did show was that when I did face those things, I was able to have a reference point to go back and make better decisions in response to those things. And that's what I became intentional about doing. And so building that spiritual pillar for me, like I said, I think God could have completely cured me of those things. I think he chose not to, for me to go through the journey of being intentional and learning, okay, you're angry right now. Okay, you're depressed right now. And it would just draw me to him to go in the Bible, go in the Word, and figure out and being intentional and figuring out what's the best response to this to make a better response. Because for me, the situation I was in was because of making poor decisions in the past and responses to that. So I became very intentional about that. And it led me to a moment where I believe I had a very balanced 4 pillars. I was really strong mentally, physically. I was in great shape. Socially, now I'm surrounding myself with the right accountability partners, the right people, and spiritually have a strong spiritual foundation. So that led me to a place to be in a really holistic place. And then I went on this journey of you talk about discipline. I went on this journey that I really felt on the other side of it, like convicted that I had survived this. And I don't mean survived combat. I mean survived this battle with depression and suicide. I felt like convicted because I'm like, I'm on the other side of this and all these other people are suffering. I have the cure, like literally the cure to this. And I need to share it. So I need to really equip myself. I really felt like that. And I didn't understand what happened to me. So I went on this journey for information. It was like a very disciplined, intentional journey for information. And I actually went back to my clinical psychologist And I'm like, I want to understand physiologically what happened to me. Like I'm at this JSOC task force doing this in this premier operation. I'm like doing this great job at this amazing opportunity to do this job.
Yeah.
And in one moment, like the wheels fly off. What happened to me physiologically? I wanted to know. And really, he didn't have answers for me. And so at my church, there was a program that the American Association of Christian Counselors had a program called PTSD Care and Counsel, and the program had expired; it was ended, and so I went on the website and I found it, and the only course they had was a course to be a caretaker, like,
Yep.
and so I took that course, and I really understood from a creation standpoint what the limbic system was, what had happened physiologically in my brain that actually the PTSD, like the post-traumatic stress disorder, which is commonly defined as the body's normal response to an abnormal situation, uh, was a lie. That my body, it wasn't disordered, that my body was doing exactly what it was created to do by God in the limbic system, because I experienced something that I was never created or intended to experience. I was necessary to experience that for the
Yeah.
protection, for our national security and protection of life, but I was never created to experience that. So the limbic system, by design, created a survival mechanism that brought on stress and anxiety and all these things. And so I just like, I was completely blown away that
Mm.
that the revelation that I wasn't broken, that I wasn't disordered, that I was actually, my body was doing exactly what it was created to do. That it just lit a fire under me to share with everyone that was suffering with this thing, and that manifested in the founding of Mighty Oaks Foundation. And
Yes.
and today we've served we've served well over 500,000 active duty service members and veterans and first responders and their spouses now, and just run this
Mm.
amazing program. And yeah, but it all came out to me, and again, not even aware that I was building out intentionally and through discipline, building out those 4 pillars in my life.
Right. And what's amazing, Chad, and I want to dive even deeper into the social one here in a few moments, but I want to touch on Mighty Oaks Foundation because God clearly used your pain and now has turned it into one of your greatest purposes. I remember years ago I was invited to kind of like a young leadership summit, and Dr. Jay Strack out of Student Leadership University was leading it. I'll never forget, he got up there and he looked at all of us and he said, "Don't you dare commit the sin of the desert." And we all kind of looked, and I was like, man, I know a lot of sins. I've never heard of the sin of the desert.
Mm-hmm.
And we all kind of looked kind of like wondering what he was even mentioning. And he noticed and he said, "You guys don't get it, do you?" He said, "The sin of the desert is when you know where the water is and you don't share it." What I love about you is, like you said, you were equipped, you were educated on all of these things, and you said, "I have to share this with other people who maybe are suffering or who maybe are going through a similar journey as what I went through." So as you talk about the Mighty Oaks Foundation, speak a little bit more about what you guys do there and some of the incredible resources that you guys have, because you guys have a lot of them, but I just believe that they'll bring a lot of hope, encouragement, and even challenge and motivation to the people listening today.
Yeah, well, I mean, we do. I mean, we do a couple of things at Mighty Oaks. 4 things specifically. We have our primary thing is a recovery program. So
Yeah.
that's where men and women who have been afflicted by trauma, whether combat trauma or life trauma, come with us for a week at our one of our ranches. And by the way, it's all paid for. We do about between $7 to $8 million we'll do this year in free
Wow.
programming, pay for travel and everything. So anybody's listening, you can go to mightyoaksprograms.org and apply. And come active duty service members, veterans, first responders, spouses. We pay for everything, and they'll come to that camp, and it's a non-clinical peer-to-peer mentorship program, and so they get put in these peer groups, and they walk through that through a program that we've methodology we put together that they walk through at a peer level and help come to their own conclusions of where they are, take personal responsibility, and apply the discipline to apply biblical processes to align their lives with the lives they were created to live. And then when they leave there, they know how to, essentially what they're getting taught during the week is how to use those tools to have the accountability and stay connected to the process moving forward. So that week is like kind of intensive. And then they walk forward, and the week doesn't end when they leave. They stay connected with this group and continue to move forward together. And then we have a discipleship process that raises up the next group of leaders to continue that peer process moving forward. And one of those classes, by the way, there's 14 core classes during a week, and one of them is called The Truth About PTSD, which is a book I wrote, a little kind of handbook that I wrote. We've given out hundreds of thousands of copies to troops, and that book was inspired by that course I took through the American Association of Christian Counselors, PTSD and Care Counsel. book, and that creation perspective of what PTSD is and what it's not, more importantly, what it's not, and so that's the main thing we do is our recovery program. Then we have the preventative program, which is the resiliency program. That's where I go to
Yes.
bases and police departments. I go all over the world and speak to our service members, and even in foreign countries, we speak to allied service forces as well on resiliency and those four pillars of resiliency and how to be resilient. I believe that an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. So if you get in the front
Yes.
end of it and help people be resilient, they're not going to end up in that recovery program, or we can mitigate a lot of it by that. And I believe you can never measure the success of that, right? You put a security guard outside of a bank, you can never measure how many robberies he prevented
Yeah.
by his presence being there, right? By that presence of to deter crime, but it works. You just can never measure it. So I don't know how many suicides we prevented. I don't know how many mental breakdowns, how many marriages we saved, but we've spoken to over 500,000 troops in that resiliency program, and maybe God will reveal one day to me, the impact we made from that. But I believe the resiliency side of it and being on the front end of it, providing resources, speaking, sharing testimony, and helping equip our warfighters ahead of time through being resilient is a successful approach. And so I'm very passionate about that, and that led me to wanting to share that outside the military
Yes.
and making the Resilience show to be able to expand that to a broader audience. And then the third thing we do is advocacy. So I go to Washington D.C. quite a bit. I testify before Congress, and I've served as the chairman of the White House's Faith-Based Coalition for Veteran Affairs under President Trump, and worked on legislation and executive orders and getting our active duty service members and veterans access to faith-based care. We
Mm.
believe that every service member deserves a right to choose between what kind of care they get, whether it's clinical care or faith-based care or a combination of both. And
Mm.
they have a right to have that. And unfortunately, that's been a political divide over the years, and we've seen it get taken away in 2009, and we got it brought back in 2018. And so we're going to continue to fight for that. And I've testified quite a bit in front of Congress and Senate over this, and advised the White House and the President Trump, and then I even advised the deputy director of the VA. And with this new administration coming in, I'm going to serve in some sort of capacity within the
Yes.
veterans world. I don't think I'll do the VA side this time, but I don't know where I'll be. I kind of have an idea, but I don't want to be presumptuous and
Yeah.
announce it here. But I will be serving some capacity to make sure that our veterans are equipped with spiritual readiness and resiliency. And then the last thing we do again, the fourth thing we do at Mighty Oaks is international programs. So we take
Mm.
all these efforts and all these programs, and we go around the world to our allied forces and help equip them and share our programs and help equip them the same way that we do for our U.S. service members. Really, essentially, train the trainer, teach them how to do what
Yep.
we're doing, and help equip them.
I tell you what, every time I see you, Chad, and every time I hear you speak, I'm just reminded that we serve a God who is in the details, who really linked us far beyond or far before when we actually met face to face, just through that course that we were able to develop here at the AACC. But let me just say this from all of us at the American Association of Christian Counselors. We're so grateful for people like you who are doing God's work for the advancement of his kingdom in this field of really mental and holistic health care. Thank you so much for what you do, Chad. I have a couple questions left because you talked about what you're doing overseas. You have a book that you released in 2024 titled A Mission Without Borders: Why a Father and Son Risked It All for the People of Ukraine. And brother, I found this book incredibly moving. You help us understand not only the everyday challenges that the people of Ukraine actually faced, you also help us understand why God doesn't just call us to love our neighbor, but also those that are kind of strangers to us. But then you also talk about this relationship development and deepening that you got to experience with your son Hunter, because ultimately, let me say something, suffering is very relatable and it actually bonds us. That's where a band of brothers, a band of sisters is actually formed when you're going through deep, dark, and difficult times together. Speak about all the lessons that you learned and some of the things that really helped form and develop the relationship you continue to have with your son.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think anybody anywhere ever would want to have to go to war,
Yeah,
much less go to war with and bring your son there.
yeah,
And so we have my family is since World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, I'm an Afghanistan veteran. My oldest son, Hunter's an Afghanistan veteran. My youngest son is still in the reserves in the Marine Corps. So, almost a full century of service in our family. So it's no surprise that, if you're in a long war like Afghanistan, you would run into a scenario that both me and my son served Afghanistan. So we served in the same war. He has a heart for people like I do. He's a very compassionate, he has a very compassionate heart. And so during the Afghanistan withdrawals, he wanted to be part of that. I remember him saying like, "Hey, I want to be on this." And I'm like, "Absolutely not." And he's like, "I'm an Afghanistan veteran too. I'm not just your son. I'm an Afghanistan veteran. I was a Marine. I have an interpreter there too." So I let him be involved, but he didn't come into Afghanistan with us, but he was involved in an operation. And then Ukraine kicked off and he wanted to be involved. And same thing, I was like, "Okay, but I'm not letting you go into Ukraine." So he got involved but it was a matter of time to where he earned his spot. He's very smart. He's very capable. He's a very natural leader. He had earned his spot on the team, and it came a time to where I had to make a decision. Whether I'm going to keep holding him back out of my fear or control, me wanting to control the situation, or I'm going to let him do the things that God's actually burdening his heart to do. God doesn't just burden my heart, right? I don't have a monopoly on that. Like, God doesn't just burden my heart for things. God was burdening his heart too, and equipped him. And I'm getting the same thing just happened to me. Call here. Sorry about that.
No, you're good.
But I lost the image on you. Am I still recording? You can see me. Everything's fine?
Yep. Everything's still good on our end, sir.
Okay. I can't see you, but I'll just keep talking as long as everything's good. Okay. So, God was burdening his heart to go and do this work. And I was standing in the way. So I had to really have my own little come to Jesus moment and sit down and say, kind of really reflect, am I going to let my son, who I love, and feel responsible to protect, go into a war? And by the way, like, I don't mean just go into a country that's at war. Like, we were going to the front lines. Like, thousands of people were dying every day. Like, we were going in where indirect fire was and kinetic combat was. Like, this is a big decision for me to. Uh-oh. I feel like I lost you again.
So, I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yep. Let me give me 1 second. I know. Okay, there it is. Okay.
There we go.
Back. Let me. I know you guys are edit this.
Oh yeah. No, you're good, Chad.
Let me hit do not disturb. Okay. All right. Yeah, so to make that decision to take him in like to combat was such a big deal for me. And so I don't want people to understand like it was just like, it was a big deal, and I had to deal with his mom.
Right.
So who's my wife?
Yeah.
And so I had to really just get on my knees and take it to God and say, man, I love Hunter, but as much as I love Hunter, God loves him more. And that was a reality that I had to really understand it. As much as I love him, and as much as I think that it's impossible to love him more, God actually loves him more. Is capable of loving him more than I can. And as much as I feel like I can protect him as his dad, God could protect him better than me. And in the safest place for my son to be, safer than being on a couch in Texas in his own home, is being in the middle of God's will. And if it was God's will for him to be on the front lines of Ukraine, and God was burdening him to do that, who was I to stand in the way of that? And so I had to make the decision to go forward and bring him into Ukraine. That call came. I put do not disturb, but that call came through again, and you're still there, right?
Yep, still here. No, that's perfect. And I think we're going to pick up right there because, Chad, as you mentioned, I think it's such an incredible prayer, and it's a pertinent one that every parent, I think, needs to really be able to pray, to surrender their child over to the Lord and His will for their life. Because I think it's easy to try to control things. It's easy to try to protect your children, but then understanding, like you just said, that the safest place your child can be is walking in God's will and walking in the calling that God has placed upon their life. So that's such an encouraging story to me. I found that fascinating in and throughout that book, and I hope and pray that every listener and every viewer would go and read every page of that because it's incredibly inspiring and it really is eye-opening, not just to that relationship and how it deepened with your son Hunter, but all that you guys are doing and continuing to do over in Ukraine. My friend, as we close and wrap up our conversation today, though, you've talked a lot about the 4 pillars. Not only do you guys stand on the Mighty Oaks Foundation, but the 4 pillars of resilience. And a lot of times people talk about mind, body, and spirit, but they don't really mention the social one. You've mentioned the social one quite a bit today. You talked about community. You've talked about accountability. I'm a big, firm believer that healing is not found in hiding. So being able to recognize that we need people in this life. We're not built or meant to do life alone. But Chad, to the person out there today who maybe feels pretty isolated, maybe feels discouraged, maybe is really struggling with being vulnerable. They view vulnerability as a weakness and not a strength. Where do they begin? Do they begin with mentorship? Do they begin by seeking and asking for help, counseling? What would you say are some good first steps for them as we close out our time together today?
Yeah, well, first of all, you said it right. Like, we were not created, we were not meant to do life alone. We were meant to do it in community. As comfortable as it may be sometimes to be alone and be in isolation, we were not meant to. And the good news is we don't have to. And as long as alone as you may feel, as disconnected as you may feel, I can say this with complete confidence. There is a community of people that will welcome you in, no matter who you are, no matter what you've done, no matter where you've been, how disqualified or disconnected you may feel. There are a community of people that would maybe up to you to find them, and it may be up to you to take the first step to open up to step in that relationship. But there's a community for you. And if you hear them like, that's not me, that sets me further back, it's just not true. It's a lie. It's a lie that you're believing. There's so many I'd say like the churches across, and there's lots of different types of churches.
Yes.
I think one of the things that, organizations like the American Association of Christian Counselors, the Biblical Counseling Coalition, one of the things that I've seen these organizations help with, I say the Biblical Counseling Coalition because they've helped us before to help plant people in churches that didn't have churches. Yes. And it's just, if you can't find a church in your community, reach out to one of these organizations and say, hey, I live in this community. And I need a church. Even Mighty Oaks. That's not what we do for mission, but I can promise you, somebody calls and says, I live in this area and I don't have a church. Yes. Somebody on the phone is going to help you find a church. Like it's and just get online and look at churches and see, does this match like the kind of environment I want to be in? Walk in and shake somebody's hand and say hello and make a friend. Like, and that initial introduction, as uncomfortable as it may be, maybe the first intentional step that you could take. Maybe your New Year's resolution: make a friend, join a community. I want to be part of a community, and that'll open up into that social pillar, which is completely essential for holistic health. You have to be around. Right. You're created to be around community, and as difficult as it may be, as uncomfortable as it may feel for you, you have to have that.
And make a friend. It's so true. Make a friend. Let somebody in. Build a community and recognize that you are not meant or created to do this life alone. Vulnerability is not a weakness, my friend. Vulnerability is a strength. Chad, my friend, again, from all of us here at Life, Love, Faith, and Family, on behalf of my dad, Dr. Tim Clinton, and myself, Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for joining us. We love and appreciate you, my friend.
Love you guys, man. Thank you.